Welcome back, everybody, to the Marketing Rules podcast. It's my pleasure to have Bob Pulver joining me today. Bob, I've seen a ton of your content online, and that's what made me reach out and why I wanted you have you on the podcast. But for those who haven't seen your great content, maybe you can give us a bit about your background and what you do now.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, James. So my background is with large enterprise. So I worked at IBM for over 20 years, and then about 3.5 years at NBC Universal, part of the Comcast conglomerate. And it was there that I started. And so I was really at the intersection, I would say, of transformation and innovation. But a lot of that stretched into, talent related things, even though I never had an HR role in those companies. And what I mean by that is I was involved in employee experience. I was involved in social analytics, trying to understand people's behavior, the way knowledge flowed around an organization, as well as, with the advent of social media, how people were sort of representing themselves online. Early days of, influencers back,
Mhm.
maybe 15 years ago. It was really also a lot of crowdsourcing and collective
Mhm.
intelligence initiatives. Some of these were related to my day job. Some of them were sort of extracurricular kinds of projects. At NBC, when I was working as chief of staff to an engineering executive, I got involved in a lot of the hiring. So not necessarily just full-time hiring, but contract hiring, working with talent acquisition, working with
Mhm.
vendor management, staffing agencies, doing interviewing, conducting the interview, schedules. So I was sort of, I guess, acting hiring manager, recruiting coordinator, recruiter, sourcer, all of those things all at once without ever actually having any of those titles. Um, which is why I think the demise of the resume needs to come, because it's just not a good representation of the things that I've done personally. But anyway, I really got a keen interest in what I saw as some of the opportunities, I'll call them,
Yeah.
in talent acquisition, more broadly, not just what exists on the TA team's plate these days, but just really thinking about people's potential. How do we more accurately identify talent and their potential to be successful? So I was certainly very encouraged with a lot of the AI based solutions I've seen over the last couple of years. We're
Mhm.
trying to improve the core concept of matchmaking, which is where things tend to go awry in recruiting. And so I just started, I jumped into the talent space with both feet, focused a lot on the technology side and how can we use technology to sort of complement or augment, human behavior and human activity. And, how can we sort of optimize that balance between, I guess, man and machine is
Yeah.
one old school way to put it. So that's where I am, and more recently started an advisory practice focused at that intersection of talent and technology, and specifically, how AI has permeated seemingly almost every facet of technology, and HR tech and talent tech
Yeah.
is certainly no exception.
And we're going to kind of touch on that today. So we're going to talk a
Mm,
little bit around kind of responsible use of AI within the kind of talent acquisition and staffing space, um, because I guess in most people's minds, especially if you're on that side, it feels a little bit like the Wild West, right? There doesn't seem to be. It's one from a technology perspective. Everybody kind of classing themselves as AI, and probably having no real kind of backup to say it is actually AI, and also the where is it getting all this? Where is it learning? Right? Where's the data that's
yeah.
training all this stuff? Where's all that coming from? And hopefully helping us in the TA space and staffing space to be more responsible. Right? What do we need to know when we're looking at these kind of AI tools? Because it feels like on a daily basis there's loads of them just dropping into our inboxes saying we do this, we can do this, we do this. So let's kind of start at the beginning. When we're talking about responsible use of AI, what does that look like, right? Where do we start when we're talking about this?
Yeah, I like how you frame that question, because it actually does start when these tools are being conceived, when they're being built, right? Because I think that's especially true with the models that the business models that a lot of companies are using, which is really um, based on data. How much insight, how much novel insight can we extract from data? How much data can we continually collect from users, from data aggregators? To your point, where is all this coming from, and are people asking that very question? And it shouldn't take a government regulator to um, or knock on the door from people you aren't expecting and don't want to see, to start asking those questions. Because if you can't trust the data, then how are you going to trust the algorithm that was based on it? So I think this is where a lot of companies have gotten themselves into trouble in the past, not necessarily in the TA space, but there's certainly been examples of that, where it turned out when someone went in, there was clearly bias in the machine generated recommendations, or whatever the output was, but you could clearly see that there was adverse impact against a particular protected category, or maybe something that doesn't have sufficient legal protections. But
Mhm.
clearly the human bias that has existed in any historical data set can very easily make its way into some of these algorithms if people are not looking at that as they're building these systems. So it's really in the life cycle of data, from when it's collected all the way to when it's used to make a decision. You really need to look at that entire sort of lifespan. And so for in the talent space, that goes back to where are you getting all these contact details? Where are
Mhm.
you getting all these resumes? What's the algorithm that you use to assess skills and competence based on those resumes, or
So the
whatever.
question, I guess the kind of follow up question is around that, and this is maybe with my cynical head on.
Yep.
Do the people, the users of these systems, one, do they care? We I know we're talking about responsible AI, responsible use of AI, but there's there's a point where it's responsible on the tech providers to kind of for good governance and compliance,
Yep.
and there's also the part of the users, right, to be questioning about this and whether they actually care. We will, as a business that works in the staffing and recruitment space, we've all met recruiters who just, well, I just want lots and lots of candidates or CV. I'm not really don't care too much where they've come from. Um, so there's a responsibility on the other side as well, right?
Yeah. 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 I think there's first of all, I think there's a fundamental foundation of trust that we need, and that's a two-way street, right? So um, it's really employees need to, and candidates need to trust that uh, organizations are being ethical in the way that they collect data. So did I explicitly give you permit? Did I apply to a job and that's why you have all this information? Did I apply to someone else's job and somehow it wound up in your database, and now you're outreaching to me? Or what was the sort of path that was taken? But I think everyone, this is a shared responsibility.
Yeah.
So um, so I think that's one of the important things about responsible AI. It's not just can I trust the AI, it's can I trust all the human beings that have interacted with it, built it, used it, trained it,
Yeah.
all of that. So I think that's I don't know if I would call it upskilling, or it's more people are going to hate me if I say you need more compliance training. But when I think about data privacy, we've been down this road, right? This isn't
Yeah.
new territory in that sense, right? Data privacy, cybersecurity, all kinds of other training you do when you're onboarded, and then perhaps annually, or whatever the appropriate
Yeah.
frequency is for a particular type of training. But I do think this is really important, because it's not just mutual trust, it's a weakest link kind of situation, right? It just takes one person to build an algorithm and disseminate it without going through those kinds of checks. And so, to your point, I do think there's responsibility on the vendor for exactly that reason. And when I think about the HR tech market, a lot of these startups are, ex recruiters. They've been in the industry, they've been in the trenches, and they know what it's like on the user side. They know how recruiters and sourcers are incentivized, and so if speed is paramount, at what cost?
Mhm.
And
And
so,
I guess it's
yeah,
also one of those things that in this gets very difficult, I guess, within larger organizations because if you've got you know TA teams or even just a few people in your TA team, the likelihood that one of them may well go rogue and just kind of start using something off their own back because they've been part of a group or something and they said, "Oh, we should all try this." Um, so the responsibility, I guess, is individual, right, to be questioning, but it goes way higher into these businesses now, right? I guess larger businesses have got to have almost like AI compliance teams or someone in there that's kind of manages the rollout and kind of authorizes this, and someone who has oversees governance of this, right?
exactly right. So, as part of some of the training that I've gone through as I'm advising clients on this topic. Um, I do have a certification from a nonprofit to actually conduct audits, to learn about what it means to be an independent auditor, what kinds of things are being audited, what kinds of structures and frameworks you need internally to make sure that um, you've got policies in place that are appropriate for exactly what you do and the functions that are going to use that technology. So there is a whole sort of governance framework. There's actually a bunch of different ones. I partner with a particular nonprofit who has gone through an accreditation with all these, regulatory bodies to, provide education and issue certifications for, who can conduct an audit in,
Mhm.
eventually there'll be one for the EU AI Act. Right now, I have my certification for my baseline certification for independent auditing of these systems, and then I have the New York City bias anti-bias certification, and I'll continue to
Yeah.
add those badges to my profile, as it were. But yeah, that's one of the sort of foundational things is how do you make sure that you don't just pass an audit today. Um, in New York City, that audit is annual, but as your models change, as they ingest more data and they learn and the models can drift, as they say.
Mhm.
So if you have model drift and you have candidates constantly coming in um, to your ATS and it's constantly sort of refiltering or whatever, part of the audit actually says, well, what candidates came through what algorithm, and let's check and make sure that there wasn't adverse impact, amongst that group for the categories that are protected in New York City, for example.
Yeah.
But the other thing, just to tie back to one of the things you said before about the vendor responsibility. So with New York City legislation, the onus is actually on the user of the technology, so on the client side. But you would hope that if you were an HR tech vendor building some type of solution like that you would probably be using it yourself in your own hiring, and therefore you're on the hook, to pass that audit one way or the other.
Yeah.
You should also probably do it whether you were using it yourself or not, because you want to assure all your clients and prospects that you're taking responsible AI and trustworthy AI seriously. And
Yeah.
so I don't think you really have much of a choice, on top of the fact that the EU is not going to let the vendors off the hook
Yeah.
in that region. So you really, what's the lowest common denominator? Why not just do it responsibly, um, to the strictest, sort of guidance or anticipated, legislation, which right now is probably going to be the EU, and then and then you're good. And then you're good. If you can pass an EU AI, audit, then you could probably pass it anywhere, at least from what I've seen to date. But right now it's tough because to your point about the governance structures, it's not just having it in place; it's that new legislation is cropping up like weeds, all over the globe.
Mhm.
It's happening all over the U.S. There's at least a dozen, 15 states that have some type of legislation coming. So New York City was sort of the canary in the coal mine, but California, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. I mean, everyone's got something. Sometimes it's about hiring. Sometimes it's also includes promotions or layoffs. It could include facial recognition and whether that's allowed
Mhm.
in hiring,
Yeah.
because it just screams that there's going to be some
And
bias.
and
But
and well, picking up on that, and this is
yeah,
the term bias you've used on numerous a couple of times now, because that was, and you kind of alluded to this as well. Previous kind of iterations of AI, you know, have taken the bias of the programmers basically, and that has been an issue. But where do we sit today when it comes to kind of AI usage and bias? Is that still, you know, built in, or is it way better than it was? Is it something we still need to be kind of careful about? You've obviously got a lot of experiences, so kind of give us a snapshot of how it is today.
yeah. So today, I think it's initiatives and I don't know if I would call this a movement, but um, it's trends like this around um, risk management and um, you know anti-discriminatory policies, adverse impact against protected categories. So race, gender. In some regions, it'll be age,
Mhm.
disability, things like that. New York City happens to only be um, gender and race, and that's for hiring and promotion decisions. So one of the challenges is the legislations have not been in place, and therefore it's not that nothing's been in place. I mean, in the U.S., we've got existing civil rights, legislation and gender protections going back probably 50 years, 60
Mhm.
years. So it's not that nothing's in place, but um, the problem with these AI tools, well, some would say not a problem at all, but it can hyper accelerate, some of that
Mhm.
bias. So at an organization, you may have a couple hiring managers that have perhaps more bias than the average hiring manager, but it's still sort of these one-off things, and maybe people don't recognize the pattern, or just stay away from that group. These guys go work in one of these other groups or whatever. The problem with AI is its ability to sort of the scalability
Yeah.
of those decisions. So if you haven't sort of corrected for that as you've built the systems, then you're going to wind up in the headlines for all the wrong reasons, right? And it's going to come later after the fact, and they're going to have to go do some root cause and some investigative work to go back. But I think more and more companies and a lot of the vendors that I've seen on the these people have been audited kind of list. A lot of them are the HR tech vendors,
Yeah.
because they know they need to get ahead of this, and they want to be not just responsible and ethical, they want to be proactive.
Yeah.
And I think over the next 6 months, as we kick off 2024, especially leading to when the New York City legislation goes into full effect, like you're supposed to be audited by July 5th of this year if you're using what they call an automated employment decision tool. So if it's anything that's stack ranking or grading or giving a score to candidates and then filtering candidates out based on that score, that's an automated employment
Okay.
decision tool.
So, kind of circling back to where we started around kind of responsible AI. If we're an employer, if we're an in-house recruitment team, or we're what are the questions that we should be asking, right, ourselves and vendors, AI kind of tooling vendors, you know, to make sure that we're asking the right questions around kind of being a responsible kind of AI user, using of this tech. So, is there kind of a set you would say, look, these are the things you must be asking to get kind of the best, so you're compliant as far as you can be?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the conversations I've had are with folks that really want to. You really want to assess this as you're down selecting your vendors, right? So there's a whole set of questions that you can ask within your RFI or RFP, process as you're evaluating vendors. If you're talking to, um, a market researcher or an analyst or an advisor like myself, um, you know, I think that has to be a set of criteria that by which you evaluate some of these vendors. So, all else being equal, if it's just down to, um, price, slightly cheaper price versus someone who's been independently, audited, I just think it's giving sort of a new importance and almost a new definition to what it means to be a trusted partner.
Hmm.
Um, and I use that in a broad context, whether it's a partner, client,
Yeah.
you know, uh, consultant, whoever. Uh, but no matter how many bells and whistles a tool has, if it's grabbing, like let's talk about contact, details, right? Like you look at some of these AI based, sourcing tools, a lot of the competitive sort of differentiation from the vendors that I've spoken to, it's about, well, your outreach is never going to work if you don't have accurate contact details. Well, that's great. So now we're just comparing the accuracy of contact details, but or the refresh rate of contact details. Is it going out and getting new information if emails change or da da da?
Yeah.
But I mean, if that's the only benchmark, then you could wind up getting yourself into trouble. And maybe you have the most accurate contact details because you're getting it by scraping, sites that you weren't really, ethically supposed to
Yeah.
do, maybe even legally, supposed to do. So there's a trade off, right? And so I think every organization is going to have to weigh their sort of risk, tolerance. But if it still just comes down to, if you're competing on price, or that's all that the powers that be care about, I'll give you this budget, so go out and do the best you can. And I don't know. I just think you've got to elevate the importance of that trusted data
Yeah.
in your evaluation. So I don't want to put that. It's not that the average recruiter shouldn't question those kinds of things, but they may not have a voice in the
Yeah. Yeah.
purchasing decision. I think it really goes back to who is taking the most pragmatic approach to vendor selection, and also thinking about their vendors sort of ecosystem, like who are their key partners, where are their primary integrations and things like that. Because again, it goes back to sort of this data supply chain, or this life cycle of data. If it's flowing through a whole bunch of systems, and that's going to happen even easier nowadays with different generative AI tools and agents and co-pilots and stuff like that. You're just issuing a command, maybe even verbally, right? And it's
Yeah.
just going off. And now the data, you have no idea whether the data went through two systems or 12, right? So if any of those things, break down, um, and somebody comes in and does an audit and they want to see how that all transpired, it could be problematic.
Yeah. And then from the kind of vendor side, you know, obviously, I mean, I know you kind of can speak from a United States kind of perspective. I assume that over time there's going to be like a badge that says, we are certified, we're ethical, this kind of thing, and that's the gold standard, right? I guess that's where we're heading with all of this, right?
Yeah, I guess the tricky part is how many of these badges do we need? How prominently are they featured on different sites?
Yeah.
So today, if you once you've been independently audited, you are supposed to publish your little, I guess virtual, plaque or some statement that says we've gone through this independent audit. Here's the name of the auditor or the name of the audit firm that did it, the date that it was done. So that is supposed to be part of public record. So if I was doing the audit, I would keep my version of those records, and then the company would publish that, and they also have to put on their career site. They have to state whether or not they passed an audit, and then they have to, for candidates who are applying, if you're using one of these automated employment decision tools, you actually have to tell them that at the beginning of their application and give them an alternate path to apply. So there's supposed to be an opt-out. I don't want AI reviewing my application kind of thing, and you go through the back door, so to speak. And
couldn't that be kind of biased in its own right, though? You know what I mean? Like, you could be be putting yourself into a black hole without even by opting out of using it. Being
you're probably right. Yeah, you're probably right. I would say it'll be interesting. I don't think there's enough data on it yet, but a year from now, we could be having a conversation about how some of these. You're going to look at the AI. I don't want to call them naysayers, but people who are skeptical about AI making any form or even influencing a decision as it relates to their qualifications. Already, I think people are concerned and are showing their own preference for whether they want AI or a human to evaluate their application. Some people are fine with it because they think, well, this should mitigate some of the human bias that I've been experiencing. Maybe you're an old guy like me, and you think that someone's, they're showing age, discrimination, or they're likely to show age discrimination. So why not let the AI, do it? Because if somebody built the algorithm, properly, they would, hopefully, it would not put a lot of weight on someone's, tenure. But I don't know. I think time will tell. But I think the way I see candidates applying to jobs now, where they'll just apply to almost anything, or they'll even use their own AI tool that they've stumbled upon and just mass apply. I don't. That's obviously going to be difficult if you have every application trying to go through, the alternate.
It's a crazy potential future, because we've talked about this on the podcast a couple of times, where the candidates have got their own AI agents applying for everything. It's just AIs talking to other AIs. It is. It's going to be interesting to see where it goes. But Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. It has been incredibly insightful. And it's great to talk about AI without actually having to dig into into the technicalities of it, which usually I get kind of lost in the weeds at that point. We'll obviously include all of your details on the show notes. If anybody wants to know more about you and your consultancy, and if they want to reach out, they can there. But Bob, for now, thank you very much.
Thank you, James. This was great.